radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
I don't know if you can hear me, but I don't know if you can see me. All right. We are here. Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. I'm always just one click away from a good time. You know how it goes. Today is Thursday, February 27th, 2025. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Now, this is my Friday. It is your Thursday. Wrapping up another great week here on Fade to Black. Let's do this, man. Help support the show. Everything that we do around here by getting yourself Fade to Black t-shirt. We have 2 shirts, 2 ways to get them. 2 links are below. And I announced last week, not quite ready yet, but we have 2 new shirt designs. And I'm going to present them. They're being printed. And so until that is done and they are ready to ship, I don't really want to announce it and get it up on the website and do all of that stuff. I want to make sure that the shirts are here and in stock. But anyway, we're getting really close for that. This week on Fade to Black, Monday, we had Dr. Yair Yafi with us, a Life of ET Contact. Great conversation. Tuesday night, we had Jacques Vallée scheduled. He has rescheduled. He had to cancel at the last minute. But Wednesday night, last night, Joel Hynek was here, Growing Up Hynek. And tonight, continuing UFOs this week on Fade to Black, Paul Blake Smith is with us tonight. Now, I briefly called this show Eisenhower and ET 1954, but we're going to be talking about Eisenhower tonight and Nixon and both of their contact experiences. We're going to be doing that and much more tonight. And there you go. Now, I have 5 major events coming up. I have Rise of the Guardians. That is March 29th and 30th, 2025 in Sedona, Arizona. After that, I head to the Midwest for the Contact Modalities XPO. That is May 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, 2025 in Delavan, Wisconsin at Delavan Lake. Then I come back here for Contact in the Desert, May 29th through June 2nd in Palm Springs, California. Then I head south to Peru with Brian Forrester. That's right, for the Inca Celebration of the Sun, June 17th through the 27th, 2025. Then I go to Virginia. That's right, for the Psi Games. I am hosting the Psychic Olympics. That's right. I'm a game show host. The Psi Games. A very unique conference. Judges, contests, games. This is going to be amazing. And this is August 1st through the 3rd, 2025 in Charlottesville, Virginia. Psi Games International. All of the links are below for everything that I am doing in 2025. All right. I've got a very busy year and more announcements coming up. All right. So let's get to it. Tonight, Paul Blake Smith is here. Like I said, it's Eisenhower and Nixon and ETs, all of that tonight. And, did Eisenhower meet ET in 1954? We know the story. Tonight, we're going to dive deep into that. And then also, of course, Nixon, 1973 with Jackie Gleason. What happened there? And did either of those presidents have their own UFO sightings and experiences before those dates? We're going to do all of that and much more tonight with Paul Blake Smith. His links are below, all of his books. He's got 6 books out. And there you go. So I'd like to welcome to Fade to Black, Paul Blake Smith. He's right there. Paul, good evening, young man. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. How about you?
It's my Friday. It's your Thursday. I'm doing pretty good.
That's right.
I'm doing pretty
I
good.
love your guitars, by the way.
And it's, thank you for noticing. I didn't know if you noticed what is going on, but thank you for that. Do you play?
No, I don't play the axe.
The axe. Yeah, well done. Well done. My house is full of guitars. It's full of guitars. One of my favorite things, Paul, is when I have guests over for the first time. It's great, man. They walk in, what? What? Yeah, it's pretty cool. It is. It's pretty cool. When you're a kid and you've got one guitar, you can't wait to show that guitar to somebody. You can't. Hey man, you want to check out my guitar? And you try to get to guitar number 2. It's a hard thing to do. You've got other expenses in life, right? Getting to guitar number 2, that's a lot of work. And so, yeah, it feels pretty good to have people come over and just watch their eyes pop out. And somewhere in this home, I have the guitar that somebody has always wanted. Yeah. Oh, man. Really? I always wanted one of those. Yeah, me too. So anyway, as we get started here, what before we get into Nixon and Eisenhower, have you had your own sighting, and what got you interested in the subject of ET and UFOs?
Well, I used to think of them as rather interesting as a kid, but I didn't pay too much attention to the skies, and I've never had a UFO or an ET sighting. I'd like to have one before I die, but we'll just see what happens. I'm too busy hunched over a laptop and researching books and writing to get out and start staring around, I suppose. I'm from Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and that's the site of maybe America's first UFO crash in 1941, when my grandfather was a judge in town and my dad was about 6 years old. And the story slowly leaked out, and some people heard about it over the years. My stepmother heard about it in the 1960s when she was in high school, for example. And so it really exploded in the late 1990s and was on Coast to Coast AM with Linda Moulton Howe, Stanton Friedman, Ryan Wood. They all investigated. No one has really come to the conclusion that it did not happen, that it may well be. And I think it did happen based on the preponderance of the circumstantial evidence. But while I was researching all of that, I've always had this interest in this Eisenhower story. And I'm thinking, where is there a book on this? No one's got a whole book. Didn't they research this? It's like the greatest story ever, a U.S. president and extraterrestrials. So once I got my Cape Girardeau book called Mo 41, The Bombshell Before Roswell, that came out in 2016. I really wanted to tackle Eisenhower, and I did for Foundations Publishing. It came out in 2020, and it did quite well. And so I wrote a sequel, and that we'll talk about in the second hour, the Nixon-Gleason alien encounter in 1973. But you can't beat a U.S. president and friendly landed aliens talking in English, according to an eyewitness who was there. And the story makes sense. Why would the aliens risk everything and come down at a U.S. Air Force base and ask to speak to the man in charge? It was a little more than impromptu. I think it was arranged this way carefully. In February of 1954, Eisenhower had just gone on a quail hunting vacation in Georgia, and he went back to the White House for a day or two, and then suddenly he had to fly off to Palm Springs, California, 2,700 miles just for a golf vacation. So, he used to love Augusta, just down the coast. It was a very short flight for Air Force One. And he played there over and over, like dozens of times. And they even named a house on the course, the Eisenhower House, built just for him. But he did not want to play there in February of 54. And I think the golf vacation was basically set up to be in the area. It was close to Edwards Air Force Base. And there was a tentative meeting set up. And he thought, well, if it happens, I'll be nearby. And if I won't, if it doesn't happen, I'll be able to play some great golf and some great courses. And he did some of that. And then one night, February 19th, 1954, a little after 6 or 7 o'clock, he took off while the press was distracted at a hotel party. They threw this big party to keep the press away from the president. Worked perfectly. He ducked out of town and he flew to Edwards Air Force Base, and he saw probably things that made your eyes pop. Any one of us, your eyes would have just popped out of your head from what he saw. According to an eyewitness who spoke up in the early 1980s, he said, "Hey, I want to tell this story because I've just found out everyone else has died, and I don't want the story to die out. I want everyone to know this before I pass away." So he did tell a story. It made the newspapers. It was syndicated. And it was like the first big release of this story. And lots of little bits and pieces have come together over the years to confirm it. And I put that all together in my book, and I think it turned out really well.
Well, okay, so let's start to pick this apart. And in the interest of transparency, I just live a few miles away from Edwards Air Force Base.
Oh,
And yeah, it's right up the street. I'm out there all the time, and I live in the Mojave Desert here. Next to me is Lockheed Skunk Works. That's about a mile up the road, and NASA's right there, and Northrop Grumman and Air Force Plant 42, where they've got the bodies buried. So all of that is right up the street, and then a few miles north lies Edwards. And what's interesting about Edwards, back then it was called Muroc Army Airfield because of the Muroc dry lake bed that is there. And what is great about that and what is interesting about that is that's where Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier. Because of the dry lake bed, it's a huge, long, natural airstrip where you could do all of this testing, and they still do today. Edwards is a testing and training facility, top secret, crazy. Now, so that there's always stuff going on out there, Paul. It's that, and the sightings that have been reported out there before Eisenhower, they go back to 1945 and earlier. Official reports there from the base, crazy before Roswell. Now, that being said, it seems that ET has always known about this location, and I don't know why that is historically. Before it was an Army airfield, geographically, the indigenous cultures, I don't know what the reasons for it are, but it's always gone on. Now, before we get back to Eisenhower, I was out there. You'll find this interesting, and I get hassled by the police, the military police, the camo dudes, the real guys, right? And while they are running my ID and taking pictures, I was on my Harley. I said, "So, you ever see any UFOs out here?" And they were not messing around with me. This was not a funny situation, and I was trying to lighten it up a little bit. And I got the guy separated, and he goes, "What? The aliens? The flying saucers?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "Hey, listen, man, this is what he tells me. We hear the same stories you do." I go, "Okay."
he was a serious guy, too.
Yeah. I said, "Okay." And he goes, "I'm looking. I haven't seen anything. I haven't, we all talk about it. We all wonder about it. Me personally, I haven't seen anything." Now, he didn't tell me that other people have seen. No, he didn't say that. But it was just strange how he volunteered that part of it. Like, no, man, we watch the news. We hear the same reports you do, but I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen any flying saucers. But that is the area that all of these, stories have come out of. And this Eisenhower story, I think there's a lot of teeth to it. Now, so really quick, back to that evening. There's a lot of details that have surfaced, so let's peel back the layers. But you did say it's my understanding that Eisenhower drove to Edwards. It's not that far from Palm Springs. It's an hour drive. I don't know why you would fly. You wouldn't save any time flying. It's maybe 80 miles, 70 miles. Is that what you heard, that he flew from Palm Springs?
Yeah, I've seen one report that said that he drove, another that he flew, but to, I think, Palmdale or Lancaster. And then he was driven from that point to the base, is something that I've read.
Yeah, it's all the same city. There's it would have been, there's no airport in Palmdale. The airport or Lancaster, Edwards Air Force Base is out there. They have Fox Field, but he wouldn't have flown there, and that's very tiny.
Yeah, he did not take Air Force One.
Right. But he would have, I think he would have flown directly to Muroc or Edwards. I'm not sure when it was renamed. It might have been renamed right around there. But I think it was called Muroc back then. That's beside the point. But I heard that he drove. I wouldn't have flown. I would have jumped in a car and just drove over. Logistically, they're very close. Anyway, so the story, you mentioned that the press was at a party, and then, but they were told what? That he had a dental appointment or some emergency?
Yeah, that's where the story gets a little confusing. It turns out the very next night, he did have a dental problem and he saw a dentist. I talked to a woman who said, my best friend was at this dinner with Eisenhower on Saturday night, the 20th, and he bit into this duck leg and he just grabbed his tooth like, ow, I've just lost a crown. And it's funny because I just lost one myself the other day and I have to go to the dentist. But it said the host of the dinner said, oh, I'm so sorry. The boys went out and shot these ducks this morning and they used buckshot, and some of the mineral or the metal was still in the meat. And Eisenhower supposedly said, what kind of a sportsman uses buckshot to bring down a duck? And he was really upset. So they called the dentist, and the dentist said, oh, yeah, the president of the United States, sure. And he went back to sleep. So they took Eisenhower to the dentist, and they're waiting and waiting. Where are you? And he finally showed up, and he did treat the dentist, and there's some records. The Eisenhower Presidential Library says we have records that he was given a new incisor or something like that, a temporary crown. And that was the next night. It was the night before, on the 19th, that he really was able to sneak out while the press was distracted. I think that was part of their deliberate strategy. And that Eisenhower, I'll backtrack. Do you remember the names Berlitz and Moore that used to write UFO books? And
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They wrote one in 1980. It was mostly on Roswell, but they found out that Eisenhower, according to a member of his administration, leaked that Eisenhower took a helicopter from like an obscure airport in the Palm Springs area out to Muroc. So there's a third option. He went by an obscure airplane, he went by car, or he went by helicopter. But he found his way out there, let's put it that way. And he was guarded by 6 bodyguards at all times, maybe not all of them Secret Service. And that's a whole other story. But they said they surrounded Eisenhower, and he never touched any aliens, but he went to the edge of a hangar. He was driven out there, I think, in a couple of vehicles, maybe a Jeeps or something. And he waited, and the aliens stepped out of 5 spaceships that had landed on the runway.
Right.
3 were circular, 2 were elongated or cigar-shaped, and they walked right up, and they showed no hostile intent. I'm pretty sure the Air Force checked them out during the day. They landed in the daylight hours and found them to be friendly. They did speak English. They were aware of our culture and our language, and they decided to call Eisenhower and give him the go-ahead. It looks like it's safe for you to show up. And he did. Eisenhower was no shrinking violet. He was a very brave Army general, like 4 or 5 stars, and he didn't take any guff from anyone. He wasn't afraid of anything, especially when you have the military and 6 bodyguards around you.
So what did they talk about?
Well, the aliens risked everything to land because they said, according to an eyewitness, a test pilot, a young Air Force pilot who was brought in because of his knowledge of aerodynamics and flight. And he was there with the 6 bodyguards, he said, in the 1980s when he released the story. And he said the aliens were aghast at the way we're polluting our planet and setting off these atomic bomb detonations in Eisenhower's testing program. We're setting them off in the upper atmosphere, in the lower atmosphere, in the ground. We're setting them off under the ocean. They're full of contaminants and, atomic pollution and fallout. And we're poisoning the planet. They asked, could you please stop doing this? And he said, well, I don't want to disarm unilaterally. So I want to know, what other nations are going to do to stop doing this. But he didn't give in, but he certainly listened. And he made a good point that, you're polluting the upper atmosphere and into outer space with this, toxic fallout, radiation and such. And plus, back in the 40s and 50s, I don't know if you've ever seen photographs of America, but in major cities, we got factories just belching black smoke, making whatever, and cars are belching black smoke. And we just had soot on our buildings, and it was really bad. We started to turn things around in the 60s and 70s and become more aware of air pollution. But I think that was part of it. So aliens had been studying us. They knew our language. And after my book came out, I wish I had known this earlier, there was an article that came out and said that scientists and cosmologists feel that there are many planet Earths in the known galaxy. They speculate, they believe all the conditions can come together, and that human life forms and grows and develops and matures like ours did. And so there are other human beings on other planets. It's interesting to note that that's basically what this test pilot said. They were very much like humans, only a little misshapen by our standards. So I'm thinking they thought of it as like their cousins at a family reunion. They were not quite human. I think their skin color was maybe a little grayer, and they were only apparently about 5 foot tall with just a little scruff at the top of their heads, no real hair, but they looked and talked human. I bet they had slightly maybe larger nostrils and chests and diaphragms for breathing a different atmosphere on their planet. But they were friendly and very warm and kind. And they invited Eisenhower and his men, why don't you step inside our ships and take a look around at your leisure? And I think from what I've read, Eisenhower said, no, I'm not going in there. I'm not clear whether some of his men were given the go-ahead. But again, he stayed encircled by these 6 bodyguards, but he tried to be as friendly as possible and hear them out.
Was it filmed? Gordon
That's
Cooper
what I'm
talks.
Reading. Yeah.
Gordon Cooper at Morocco.
Yeah.
Gordon Cooper was a test pilot before he became an astronaut, and he said, "Man, we filmed flying saucers landing at Morocco." Did they
took
film?
off, but they got him. Yeah. And
did they film
that's
this,
an example. Yeah.
Did they film the Eisenhower incident?
That is what I read. And there's an Italian reporter by the name Cristoforo Barbato who said he had a source at the Vatican. And the Vatican said, yes, the Eisenhower encounter did happen, that the Vatican has footage. There's black and white footage and there's color footage. So these cameras were set up in advance. Again, this was not an impromptu meeting. This was something they prepared for in this special hangar at the far end of the base. So the reporter said, my Vatican source told me that when the aliens decide to put on a little air show and show what their ships can do, fly about in front of Eisenhower to impress him, they got too close to the technology in the cameras and shorted out one of the cameras. So the film footage in that camera ends abruptly. And you remember Close Encounters with Steven Spielberg and Richard Dreyfuss, and aliens fly too close to like a power plant or a whole city. Richard Dreyfuss's truck goes out. They used real life stories from your friend Jacques Vallée in preparing that their technology, alien technology, shorts out our cruder electrical systems in cars and power plants and cities and such, and causes blackouts, or at least it used to. So that's another example that seems like a believable detail, that this old time film footage, the old camera, maybe a newsreel camera or a movie camera trying to record the event, shorted out. One of them did.
Did they strike a deal?
They sure tried to. Eisenhower was leery about having them even anywhere near civilization. He saw their air show. They put on a free air show, and I imagine they zipped back and forth and up and down and spun around and did all these amazing things. And he was probably thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to set off a panic. And that's what he told him. He says, I just don't think our world is ready for you yet. This might cause a panic if people were to see this in our skies regularly, if you flew over cities, big population centers, if you got too close to our air traffic, our own airplanes and helicopters. So he probably reluctantly said, you guys are going to have to go. But they did forge a kind of agreement according to a 1989 Defense Intelligence Agency document that was leaked in 2017. I got permission from Heather Wade, former Midnight in the Desert host who used to work with Art Bell. She said her source sent her this document, and it's a bombshell. You may have read it on the internet, and she gave me permission to print it in my book. And it mentions in there that Eisenhower did meet with aliens, and 2 more times in 1955 to finish this agreement, that aliens would agree not to show themselves too overtly and set off a panic and try to talk to people. And in exchange, they were given an obscure base in the Nevada desert where they could land and examine flora and fauna that we would provide for them. Technology would be exchanged. And so I think that sounds like it's a possibility. It sounds a lot like that Bob Lazar story of working at S4, Sigma 4 or Sector 4 out in the desert, even away from Area 51, where there were spacecraft and strange goings on, but that may have been even something else entirely. But the document made clear that Eisenhower did forge this agreement, and the sticky part of this is whether he actually gave permission for some aliens to pick us up, kind of without our permission, abduct us, look us over scientifically, medically, and then put us back. And in almost every case, we are put back, and it's wiped from our memories for many years, and maybe under hypnosis you recall this. Eisenhower supposedly told the aliens, well, you're so advanced, how can we stop you? And that's according to Mr. Don Phillips of Skunk Works. You know, you're familiar with that. They have a place in Las Vegas, and they have a place out near Edwards, Skunk Works. And Mr. Phillips said, I saw the file. I got to read it as part of my highly classified work with the technology we were trying to implement. Some of it was alien-based. And by golly, Eisenhower did talk to these aliens and admit, you know, you're so advanced, how can we possibly really stop you from doing anything? But they did forge this agreement, and who knows, it could be enforced to this day.
Yeah, Skunk Works is fascinating. And like I said, it's about a mile up the road. And the first time that I saw Skunk Works, I couldn't believe that it was that close to the street. Okay. You would think that it would be harder to see and to access. The buildings are giant. They've all got the skunks painted on them, and it's right there, and you can see the hang. It's literally the street in front of my house, T-bones at Skunk Works, and then you turn right, you're facing the main building, you can see the runway, And then you just turn and you can just sit and look. It's right there. And all you can do is just wonder about what is going on there. I mean, there's no question that they are doing advanced design work and construction and stuff on things. It's their job. I get that. Then there's all of the other mystery behind it. And you could just drive right down. You would think it, but back when it was built, this was all desert out here. It was a very remote place. And now that's not the case, but you can drive around almost on all sides of the building, and it's just fascinating. And then, of course, right up the road is Edwards, and it's right there too as well. And it's just a fascinating part of our history. Now, the other part about this case, before we get back into it, part of the historical record is the AP and UPI back then, the wire services, reported over the wire that Eisenhower had a heart attack and died in Palm Springs on this same weekend.
Yeah, real responsible reporting. They got carried away the next night when Eisenhower did disappear from view, that he did have a medical emergency. So they got carried away and thought, well, since President Roosevelt died on vacation in Warm Springs, Eisenhower must have died on vacation in Palm Springs. And that was pretty reckless, shoddy journalism. Turns out he was getting treatment for his broken crown from a dentist that next night. But that shows you the level of maybe boredom of the reporters sitting around with nothing to do in Palm Springs, making up things and based on rumor and innuendo.
Yeah, that's possible. I take it a step further. I don't think the mystery surrounding that weekend and how it went down and what really happened, and Eisenhower going to Muroc, Edwards, to meet with aliens, and you have all of these different cover stories popping up, including he died. I don't think any of that is coincidence. I don't think it was shoddy journalism. In my opinion, I think that there was a huge cover-up going on that were changing history of this planet. And so, yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence that the report went out on the wire that our president died of a heart attack. I don't think that's a coincidence. Not on that weekend. No.
It's crazy. Also, as you know, there's the latest space or aeroflight technology center at Edwards. It's like where the top brains in 54, maybe to this day, and where they landed the space shuttle and things. This is where you have aerodynamic experts and flight experts, and the very cream of the crop are out there. And as you mentioned, there were a number of UFO sightings leading up to 1954. This Berlitz and Moore book said we interviewed a number of people. We saw all kinds of UFOs, they said, in the skies in about 5 or 6 years leading up to this landing at Edwards for the Eisenhower encounter. And they called them purposeful flyovers, that they were trying to mentally condition people, that we're here and we have advanced technology and we're watching you, to make sure it wasn't just a complete shock. So that could be all part of the process to kind of break us in at that time. But Eisenhower kind of put the brakes on things when something else really remarkable happened. According to the eyewitness, the test pilot, they tried not to freak out about it, but the aliens finished their air show and landed and stepped back out to talk to Eisenhower and disappeared from view. They managed to cloak themselves. And the pilot said, we knew they were there. We could hear them, but we could not see them. And then they reappeared, I think he said, in different places on that runway. And Eisenhower's like, oh my gosh, we cannot have this in our world. You can't teach this to other people. You've got to, keep at arm's length. Our world is just not ready for this kind of advanced ability and technology.
Now, Eisenhower, let's back this up a couple of years to 1952. And he had his own UFO sighting, didn't he?
According to an article written by a former serviceman serving on the USS Franklin Roosevelt just off the coast of France, in January 52, Eisenhower was there on an inspection tour of military installations and on that ship. And at night, the boat was kind of rocking. It was a big storm, thunder, lightning, and the waves were rolling. And Eisenhower came up like in the middle of the night. He can't sleep. And he asked for some coffee. And he's standing around shooting the breeze with the overnight crew working the graveyard shift on the helm. And they looked out, and lo and behold, here's this round disc hovering over them and just kind of staying in place, unaffected by the wind and the rain and the lightning. And he said this went on for like 10 minutes. It wasn't a fleeting glimpse. They just sat there amazed. I wonder if anyone grabbed a camera. But Eisenhower took it pretty calmly. And he told everyone else, well, I'm going to look into this. Keep it under your hats. Don't talk about this. And the author of the article that came out in 1997, I think, said we never heard from him again. So we just kept the story silent. And he said, I wanted to tell this story before we all die out. And I'm glad he did.
Isn't that interesting? Where Eisenhower got a little warm up about contact and what it would be like to, see something that, from another world, and then turn around and 2 years later, this happens at Edwards, something that was pre-planned, that there was apparently contact with ET. They told us when they were arriving. We were set up and ready for their arrival. We had film cameras, right? And we did all of that. Eisenhower's in Palm Springs. This whole event is being set up. He goes out and meets with them. And then after that, they have a second meeting at Holloman in New Mexico. And which again was filmed. This was also a huge part of UFO history, but the story behind all of this, it being filmed, and the ETs, and a treaty that was agreed to. What do you know about that?
The late Art Campbell was a very fine UFO investigator and did great work in the Holloman landing. Said that in February of 55, 1 year later, Eisenhower flew in. It was like a Sunday, and everyone was gathered on the base in like what they call a base theater. And he swore them to secrecy and asked, let's not talk about this. And to backtrack a little, after his encounter in 54, the test pilot says, we were all gathered together and Eisenhower swore us to secrecy. We were not to discuss for matters of national security what we just saw and experienced. So Eisenhower did that too to the Holloman base. And according to a couple eyewitnesses that Art Campbell gathered, Air Force One flew in, remained on the runway in the distance, and two discs came down, like silver, silent alien craft, very obviously not from this world. One remained up in the air, sort of like standing guard. The other landed. Eisenhower got out and kind of slowly walked over, and he met with, I guess, I'm assuming, the same aliens he did in 54. And this was probably to sign and get this agreement finalized. We have to remember there are more than one race, one species coming here. It's not just humans. There may be grays, little bio-robots, and there may be reptilians or very large, tall, white grays, as they call them, or the blue Nordic type aliens. Just a wide variety could be coming here to observe us. We're so fascinating and dangerous now that we have the atomic bomb and the ability to blow up our world. So we've never been more of interest to alien beings. And you kind of wonder, did other races sign on to this agreement that Eisenhower was trying to forge, asking them, please don't show yourself over any major city. If you have to, make it fleeting and don't set off a panic. Remember, in those days, they did not want another October 1929 Wall Street panic, and that was possible. Anything that would rattle the stock market and send the shares crashing and put people out of work. His generation, Eisenhower's generation, remembered that all too well. And the stock market didn't have certain safeguards in those days, so it was a little delicate. So Eisenhower was rightly concerned. Also, we have to keep in mind, he's the president that put on our currency, "In God We Trust." He was a deeply conservative religious man. He says, "I'm the most religious man I know, frankly." He even had himself baptized once he became president. He's the only U.S. president to be baptized. And so that was part of his mindset, that he worshiped Jesus Christ and God, and probably wasn't too thrilled with these alien visitors in the first place, but he knew he had to deal with reality. He dealt with it with all kinds of forces in World War II, and the Italians and the Germans had banded together in Europe, and we fought them under Eisenhower's direction with the British and the French, and they had what they called Foo Fighters, strange orbs and daylight discs in the European theater that would be buzzing around our aircraft even back then. So Eisenhower was familiar in the early to mid 40s. He got a firsthand close-up look in 52, and then he got to meet with them in 54, maybe 55 as well. He was probably our most knowledgeable, brave, courageous, and conversant president when it came to aliens, maybe to this day.
So the Holloman treaty and encounter, I should say, was also filmed, and Bob Ebenegger. Now I've talked to two people that have allegedly, two people involved in the project that have seen the film, and so that being said, the film shows this robed ET stepping down off of the craft and walking up to the camera. Well, it shows them landing and then walking up. He's got some type of headdress on. He had a big nose, by the way. I always found that interesting in the description. But he had robes and everything. That film, Bob Ebenegger, who made one of the great documentaries of all time, UFOs Past, Present, and Future, was promised by the White House and the Pentagon and the Joint Chiefs that he could use that footage in his film for the interest of disclosure. And he ended up only having a small piece of the film of the dots coming down, and then it cuts off. But this is another very documented encounter out there in New Mexico at Holloman Air Force Base, and where the treaty was agreed to by Eisenhower at that time for some type of cooperation and exchange program.
That's the story, and Art Campbell deserves a lot of credit. He interviewed a telephone lineman who had not gotten the message that you needed to clear out of the base, said he was up on this telephone pole working, and he scooted down real fast when he saw these two alien craft come down and land one on the tarmac near Air Force One. And I thought that was an interesting story. You probably don't want to admit that you're a coward, and you're not really a coward, but you're not sure what's going on, and you want to see what's better from standing on your own 2 feet on solid ground. So that was another source that said that something very unique was going on that day in February of 55. So we can come to the conclusion that an agreement was formed. And here's where it gets a little muddy, because most treaties have to be confirmed by Congress. How would this be enforceable? What would we do if the aliens violated the treaty? And, you know, they're holding all the cards. They have the superior technology. I never found in any way that they were hostile, threatening to do this or that to us, or to invade, or they were going to harm any member of the Eisenhower administration or any person in America. But it's still a little unnerving to know we really are not in charge of our skies. We do have visitors that are far superior in their technical ability and maybe even able to cloak themselves, which sounds like something out of Star Trek, but it is something that I understand our U.S. military is working on and making some headway in cloaking, which would be really amazing if and a little frightening to know there could be people walking around you who have nefarious goals in mind that you can't quite see them until maybe it's too late. Hopefully that's not going to happen, that it will be very controlled and it's for military warfare only. But the aliens said we would like to start an education program for the people of Earth to get them braced up for the fact that we are here and we're friendly, we're maybe even related to you in a sense. And Eisenhower put the kibosh on that too. He didn't want any part of aliens stepping out and talking to anyone. There is a story by a man who went to Edwards Air Force Base in apparently early April of '54 and said that the aliens had come back. He and some other older gentlemen, including Alan Franklin, I think his name was, or some other men who used to know Harry Truman, were in retirement. They went out by car and were given a thorough debriefing. And they were allowed to see, maybe from a distance in a hangar, the aliens were back and talking to Air Force officials, according to this man, and they were able to cloak themselves and cloak items. And it just freaked out some of the scientists that they were speaking to. And it just, it was an amazing scene. So this was conducted in private at the Edwards Air Force Base a month or two after Eisenhower arrived there. And according to this man's letter, his name was Gerald Light, very famous letter. He did mention, as I understand it, Eisenhower was here in February and made a secret trip during his golf vacation. And there might be a message broadcast to the nation in the month of May. And obviously that never happened.
What is really interesting is it appears that the intentions are good, because both of those encounters were scheduled in advance, which says that we are in communication with ET,
right?
And there's some type of cooperation going on. And so Eisenhower knew in advance of both of these meetings with ET, knew in advance. And if we push this forward and we look at the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the way that Spielberg presents it there, E.T. and us were in communication and we were cooperating with each other and exchanging our citizens. Right. And that, and that's clearly what that film was about. And now, which goes right back to what Eisenhower had done in 54 and 55. And now Spielberg, all of this going back to Emmenegger and UFOs past, present, and future. The White House wanted disclosure, their word, disclosure. Today we use it a little bit too freely, right? But disclosure was always out there. It was something that was always talked about. Now Spielberg is filming his new UFO movie, and they started production now. It is going to be out in the summer of 2026, next year. Are you ready? You know what the working title is? It looks like it's going to be called. There was two names. It looks like it's going to be called Disclosure. The name of the film.
That is very interesting. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? The other a couple of working titles were Dish. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Sounds like something from the Dish Network, though.
yeah, could be. But Disclosure looks like maybe the title of the film, going back to all of what does Spielberg know, Emmenegger, and all of these stories, this pop culture, thing. all goes back to Eisenhower in Palm Springs and Eisenhower in New Mexico. Where there's smoke, there's fire, Paul.
Yeah, Spielberg, remember, did lots of real life research with Dr. J. Allen Hynek and Dr. Jacques Vallée in the mid 70s to create Close Encounters, in which an Air Force base out in the American desert Southwest at night has aliens come down and interact with Air Force officials. All it lacked was Eisenhower, frankly. And there's a lot of parallels. You're very sharp to pick up on that. That Spielberg first became intrigued with UFOs when he heard about the Sutton family in Kentucky having this alien invasion of their home out in the woods, that they were sitting down to dinner, and these strange little gremlin type aliens with big ears and big bug eyes seemed to just jump all over their house and in the trees, and they shot at them and such. And Spielberg wanted to turn that into a movie, and he's just now finally he edged close with the movie Gremlins, if you've ever seen that. The description of the Sutton family of the aliens that they saw is very much like what you see in Spielberg's Gremlins. But we're going to get even more stuff. I look forward to it, like you say, especially under the title Disclosure. Well, what are they going to do otherwise here? This is very interesting.
Did Eisenhower meet with any other presidents after him? Did he meet with Kennedy? Did he meet with Johnson?
Yeah, and this is part of my book in one chapter. Kennedy made 3 visits to Palm Springs and visited President Eisenhower in his retirement home on a golf course and said, everyone get out. I got to talk to the former president in private. And no one was allowed in. I don't know what the two of them talked about. I'm sure some of it was Vietnam War strategy. But we all know what they could have talked about because JFK was probably very curious. His son, JFK Jr., said, that's the biggest part of my dad that a lot of people don't know about. He was just really curious about a lot of stuff, and he would look into things. So you can tell that if he even got a whiff of Eisenhower and met with aliens, I want to know all about this. So JFK and Eisenhower are very different. One was from the Navy, the other from the Army. One was young, one was old. They became kind of pretty close friends. They talked on the phone quite a bit. And they met at Camp David, and 3 times in the short Kennedy presidency, they're huddling in private. So after his murder, JFK was assassinated in 1963. Johnson flew out and met with Eisenhower on the exact 10th anniversary, February 20th, 1954, missing by 1 day. He met with Eisenhower, and some of the press were there to record some of it, and then they shoot him away, and Eisenhower and Johnson started talking in private, and there were 2 Air Force Ones at the airport that day, which is strange because Johnson did not have a vice president. And some of the reporters kind of wonder what's going on. I checked Johnson's schedule. There's some odd gaps where it's not recorded what he was doing with Eisenhower and in Palm Springs.
And this was in Palm Springs.
Yeah,
on the anniversary.
Yeah, you just happened to fly out there on the exact day 10 years later, as if an agreement needed to be renewed or altered or, scuttled entirely. I don't know. He also went out and flew out there in 1968. Just before he was going to leave office, Johnson flew out and met up with Eisenhower on the exact date again in February of 1968. So something was up. The two of them played golf that day, and I'm sure they also discussed Vietnam War strategy. But we all know what else they could have been talking about in private. Vietnam War would have been a handy, convenient cover story if you wanted to talk without any microphones or aides, assistants listening in like, what? You're talking about aliens? So not everyone was clued in on what was going on, but the presidents, that's an exclusive club of the highest knowledge, at least back then. I'm not so sure what presidents since have been told. They're treated almost like temporary custodians of the White House. I don't know if they're given the whole lowdown anymore.
I don't know what it is about this area. I don't know. I obviously the desert, but Palm Springs, Joshua Tree, right? All that's just right up the road, 75 miles away. and where you have Giant Rock, George Van Tassel, Landers, the Integratron, the original contact in the desert UFO gatherings that they had out there in the 50s and 60s. They had 10, 15,000 people out there for those UFO festivals that they had back then, the original contact in the desert. George Van Tassel's original sightings and contact experiences were all right. All of this. And I have had so many sightings myself personally in this area. I don't know what is going on.
I'm very jealous. How many sightings would you really think you've seen now? Because I don't get any.
Me?
Yeah.
Hundreds.
Oh my goodness.
Hundreds.
Stop hogging them all. I don't get any.
we get together out here. Paul, this is not a joke. We get together out here 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 people, 200, and get together and look at the sky, and something crazy always happens.
Yeah.
Something nuts. I mean, not like, oh, I wonder what that was. No, we're talking about everybody screaming at the top of their lungs. Just some fascinating thing. And it's all going on right here. You can do it any night.
How much of that do you think could have been possibly our technology replicating alien technology? I guess you wouldn't know, but
hard to say.
Yeah.
The when you have a Class A sighting, okay, like the real deal, and one of them, I'll just make this really brief. We're going to be up against a break here. I'm with a couple hundred people, and this was the now famous green chrome balls. Okay. All right. So this thing, route in Joshua Tree, and it comes out from behind this mountain, low across the desert, behind the mountain, and it's this green ball, and it's going across. It's not high. I don't know, a couple of 100 feet in the air, skimming across the desert, and we're all looking at it. And I've got night vision with some amplification on it, so I'm looking at it pretty close, and I can see it. And it was a green, like a Christmas ornament, like a green chrome shiny ball, and it's going across. And it's this whole sighting lasted probably 10 minutes. It wasn't, so anyway, it goes across and everybody's screaming and lasers, and I'm watching the lasers bounce off of it. It was crazy. And this thing took off and just went up. It took like 5 or 10 minutes. Finally, it goes across the desert and then up, and then turns into a star, and then goes off into space. Now, we all saw it. Here's the crazy part. What did I see? I don't know. Was it us? Was it them? I don't know. But I can tell you this: 29 Palms Marine Base is 15 miles away. The largest Marine base in the United States, right? Airfields, airstrips, Marine training. It's a huge 29 Palms. It's huge. And this is going on right next to that base. Did they fly out jets? No. Helicopters? No. It was there for 5-10 minutes it took for this thing to fly up and to go up. Zero interest. Now, what does that tell you? It tells me two things. One, the Marines don't give a shit because it happens all the time. They're not chasing this stuff every time something happens. That's one conclusion. The second one, it's ours. There's no reason for them to react to it. It's ours. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know what I saw. There's great video of this on the internet. You can hear me. I'm talking into a PA system as all of this is happening. And it was amazing. But I remember that night, it was like the next day, I had Coast to Coast I was hosting that week. And Lisa Lyons calls me, the boss at Coast to Coast. And she goes, so what are you going to do this week on Coast? I said, I'm going to interview me. She goes, what? I said, yeah, I just had a sighting out here. And I told her about it. She goes, yeah, go for it. So that's what I did. And as big as Coast to Coast is, and all the media listens to that, I go and talk about this mass sighting that we have. And I didn't hear from Fox. I didn't hear from CNN. I didn't hear from the BBC, the New York Times. Nobody. If that same thing would have happened today, I would have been flooded. Back then, it was like really weird. I took phone calls about it and presented it out there. There was video, everything else. It was really strange how that sighting, as big as it was, and it's me reporting. It's not a couple of fishermen in a swamp in Texas, right? It's me on Coast to Coast that saw this. Nothing. Crazy. So again, how many other people saw it? I don't know. Was it tracked by 29 Palms? Certainly was. They have a radar and the airspace above that military installation. All of that is monitored and covered. What gives? I don't know. Was it us, them? I don't know. I can only tell you what we saw, and it was incredible. And you can see something like that, Paul. You come out here any night, you're going to see something like that.
But it'll be frustrating, wonderful to see, but frustrating to not know. Is this aliens messing with us, or is this our own government test flying the latest technology they don't want to admit to? They have to test fly it somewhere. I understand Utah is a good place now with huge open spaces, and in Nevada as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And what, there's a third part, is it adversarial? Is it Russia? Is it China with some kind of crazy technology that I would rather have it be aliens, to be honest with you. I don't need Russia having that kind of tech. No.
Yeah. It's utterly fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's take our break right now.
Did you have a lot of corroborating eyewitnesses with you?
We had 200 people there.
Oh my goodness.
200 people. There was a documentary film crew shooting a movie
cool.
with like 5 cameras. Yeah. Oh, this is a well documented. It was just a crazy, crazy, crazy night of sightings that night, and I can't express it. That night, we got to take a break, but we were giving George Norrie his birthday party, and that I was hosting with George, right? And so we're setting up for the band and clearing the tables out for dancing and stuff. And that's when we got the text, UFOs right now. And we ran out. I jump in a golf cart with a security guy, and we take off, and people are running up this dirt road. It was crazy. It was like right out of the movies, and everybody's UFOs. Like, what is going on? We pulled up, and there it was, a big crowd of people, and it was crazy. It was crazy. It was absolutely nuts. A lot of fun. And for those that were there, they know exactly what we saw that night. And that was the second sighting. The sighting before that, I missed it. Everybody else saw it. It was off on the other side, which is what triggered the text and things, UFOs out here. When I got there, it was the second sighting, the green chrome ball. It was nuts. All right, let's take our break. Paul Blake Smith is with us. When we come back, President Nixon. This is Fade to Black. I'm your Jimmy Church. We'll be right back after this short break. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get your alerts and access to over 2,000 videos. Click that subscribe button right now. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and get the Fade to Black official podcast. 2,000 episodes, all of them commercial free for just $2 a month. Watch Into the Vortex on Gaia TV. It's Fade to Black for the screen. Simple to do. Go to Gaia.com, search Jimmy Church, or click on the link below. Follow Fade to Black on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Get all of the show updates every single day. It's now called X, but who cares? How you doing? Jimmy Church here. Special announcement. Get your Fade to Black t-shirts. That's right. Help support the show. Help support everything that we do over here. We've got 2 t-shirts. We've got 2 ways to get them. Get your Fade to Black t-shirt today. Go Backley Tappy. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and become a Fadernaut. Get a membership. That's right. Everything is commercial free. You have access to downloads, and you get to call yourself a Fadernaut. Today we're headed to Bolivia, Tiwanaku, Peru, and of course, Bumapunku. Brian, exciting. Thank you so much for everything, my friend.
Always an honor. Right behind us is the sacred river of the Inca that goes past Machu Picchu. So we're going to be driving up to its source at 15,000 feet above sea level and then down to Lake Titicaca.
So today we hit 15,000 feet.
Yes.
Crazy. And you can do it with us. All you have to do is go to hiddenincatours.com. Simple. We've got 2 tours coming up next year, one in June for the summer solstice, right? And then another one right here in November. So hiddenincatours.com. Come and hang out with Brian and I and his amazing team.
Right on.
River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. All right. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Paul Blake Smith is with us talking about Nixon and Eisenhower. He's written 6 books on the subject, and we just covered Eisenhower. Let's jump into Nixon here. And before we get into Nixon and Jackie Gleason, Nixon had his own UFO encounter that happened in 1969 at the White House. What happened there?
Supposedly, and this is not well researched, but it is claimed by a UFO group that the military source told them there was a disc that hovered over the White House in Nixon's first month in office, and it set off kind of like alarms. And Nixon wanted an investigation. It took off. It was harmless. It was reddish, and it had a bit of a glow, and it was somewhat football shaped. And that the military looked into it, and there wasn't much they can do other than to say, you know, this thing happened. You can't really control the skies. You could maybe send up a helicopter if they could get up close enough. And, you know, in 69, our technology, maybe some jets from an Air Force base could have done something, but it was harmless. But I think it kind of sent a message to Nixon, who, remember, was Dwight Eisenhower's vice president.
That's right.
I would be pretty sure Nixon did not know about the Eisenhower encounter at the time. He was considered a little immature and a little unsteady, maybe a little flighty, but he earned Eisenhower's respect by doing a lot of hard work, sticking to it, and supporting the ticket. And by the mid-50s, I think he was starting to be trusted with extraterrestrial information, especially when Eisenhower realized he's going to be the standard bearer of the party and maybe the next president, and I better take him in on this. So Nixon was knowledgeable, and one of his good friends in golfing in the late 50s and 60s was Jackie Gleason, the conservative comedian who loved to golf and perspired excessively like Nixon did. And they both had 2 teenage daughters, and they drank a little to excess, but they just became natural, well-bonded golfing buddies in South Florida, where Nixon would go for golf vacations. And when he became president, Nixon immediately snapped up a beachfront home in Key Biscayne, which was like a 10 or 12-minute chopper flight, Marine Force One, from Homestead Air Force Base just south of Miami. And in his term and a half as president, Nixon was in Key Biscayne in Miami 55 times, even though he had a home out in California where he lived. The name of it escapes me, near Whittier. He grew up in that area.
San Juan Capistrano was
something like that. Yeah. So naturally, it escapes me when we're talking about it, but that's not all that important. What is important is why he kept going to Homestead Air Force Base, which I have read. There have been a few sightings of discs in that area. It's close to the Bermuda Triangle, if you put any stock in that, on the coast, east coast of Florida, right near the Atlantic Ocean. And there's been a couple of statements that bodies have been held there. So Nixon used Homestead almost every time he went down there, and would fly in on Air Force One, and he would take a chopper over to his Key Biscayne home where he had a chopper pad. So that's where we set the story in February of 1973 on the exact date of the Eisenhower encounter, February 19th, where again, if there's a treaty involved, it needs to be amended or updated or ended. After my book came out, the Nixon-Gleason Alien Encounter of 2023, I was contacted by a pretty deep dish UFO researcher, and he said, Paul, your book is right on, that Nixon was there that night, not just to entertain Gleason, who was sent home, but Nixon had his own agreement to forge an update, and he wanted to do something beyond his old boss, Eisenhower, and he did do this. And I trust this UFO source. He's got sources in the military and in the media and in people in Europe. And I thought, wow, I wish I had this information before my book went to press. But it gives you a little focus on why he would have been there at that date and why he went ahead and took his golfing buddy, Jackie Gleason, with him.
Now, just a couple of comments. Nixon would have went through everything that happened in the 60s, which includes Gerald Ford and the congressional hearings for UFOs and flying saucers and the incidents that went down in Michigan. And then, of course, the Condon Report and Project Blue Book and the Air Force and the Department of Defense. Nixon went through all of that. And so he must have been briefed somewhat on the subject. And then, of course, he becomes president. And so I think that is something that people really need to take note of, about the climate of ET contact, UFOs disclosure, and what the government knew, what the Air Force knew. This is a very heated subject in the 60s going up through the closing of Blue Book in '69, which Nixon would have been knowledgeable of all of these things. Plus, he was the president. And then the second part for me, which I think is even more interesting, is this particular weekend is documented. There are pictures of Nixon and Gleason together on the golf course.
That's right. It was on live national television that afternoon,
right.
Monday, February 19th. Jackie is hosting his Inverary Golf Classic, his tournament with lots of celebrities, and Nixon shows up in a helicopter. There was a helipad right behind Jackie's upscale home on the 18th course. And Nixon gets out and gets into a golf cart with Jackie, and Jackie drives him up to some microphones where Nixon gives an impromptu press conference, and they're posing together for all the photographers. Tom Jarrell of ABC News was there. He just passed away not too long ago, and he appears in some of those pictures. So this was going on that very afternoon. It's not like this is outlandish or ridiculous. There are photos of Nixon and Gleason golfing way back into the late 1950s together. Jackie had this obsession with UFOs. And in this regard, a little after the Eisenhower encounter, which he may have heard about, he decided to build his own home in the shape of a spaceship, a round circular craft he built outside New York City in Westchester. And he built it kind of on the edge of this bluff where it could get this expansive view like you're riding in a spaceship. Everything was circular in the UFO house, it was called. And one of Gleason's first guests at the grand opening, I think in '59, was Vice President Richard Nixon. So this had to be awfully strange at the time, because Nixon just can't tell a civilian what's going on in private. That, yeah, we are being visited, and there's an agreement formed. He couldn't release this top secret information. I'm sure Gleason kept badgering him. But the key part of this story is Jackie put out this statement on late night radio for years in New York City. I'll give $100,000 to anyone who can show me the hard proof of alien visitation. After a few years, that went up to $500,000. By '73, it was $1 million. Jackie said, I'll give $1 million to anyone who can come up with the proof of alien visitation. So Nixon, by January of '73, is caught between a rock and a hard place. He has won a landslide re-election in November '72, sitting on top of the polls, sitting on top of the world. But his Watergate burglars are threatening to talk, and they want hush money to pay their lawyers and legal fees and keep their mouths shut to the press, the police, the media, the FBI. Nixon is caught on tape in the White House railing against this. Where am I going to get this blankety blank money? They want $1 million for openers. Tapes made just after Jackie's little visit with Nixon in February of '73. Nixon's perfectly calm. He says, oh, $1 million. Yeah, we've got that. I know where we can get our hands on that. So Jackie made this offer. Nixon knew about it. He needed $1 million for openers to shut up his Watergate burglars and their hush money demands. So you can see 2 and 2 together go as 4. And Nixon and Gleason used the same lawyer, a man named Herb Kalmbach, who went to prison for distributing large amounts of hush money cash to the Watergate burglars. So, gee, where did they get this cash? Jackie made up to $14 million a year as an entertainer, an astounding amount back then. Even today, that's impressive. But, you know, you take into account inflation and cost of living, and it's like $100 million. You know, Jackie had money to burn, like building his own UFO house. So the whole story fits together perfectly. Nixon needed the money. He was desperate. Jackie had it to burn and said, I want that proof. So that's what they did one night, February 19th, 1973.
And so the story goes, I'll let you tell it, of course. You've got much more detail. I have looked into this story, this incident, from every angle for a number of years. I think that it went down. I don't know if it went down exactly as we wanted it to, but do I believe that Jackie gets a phone call late at night, Nixon shows up at his house, and they take a drive down to Homestead? I think all of that happened. Now, so what? Jackie's side of it, he's at home, he gets a phone call, right?
I believe so. He hosted that day's golf tournament, ate dinner, and was home relaxing alone. His wife was in another part of their upscale home, and Jackie apparently got a phone call, said, be ready. I believe Nixon arrived on that chopper pad, or he sent his pilot to pick Jackie up. The idea that the Nixon showed up at his door and the two were driving around Miami in the dark, I don't believe that. But I do believe Nixon probably sent that chopper, picked up Jackie, flew him over to Homestead and waited for him there, or possibly was in that helicopter with Jackie, and showed Jackie the hard proof that was tucked away at Homestead Air Force Base.
Okay, let me jump in. Let me jump in, Paul. So I always found it a little bit tough to picture Richard Nixon driving his own car around Miami.
I don't believe that either.
Yeah, it never made any sense to me, but that was the story for many, many years. But you believe that a helicopter was sent to Jackie Gleason's house?
Just as Nixon arrived on that chopper pad on the Inverary golf course right near Jackie's house that afternoon, his pilot knew the coordinates. He knew how to get in and out of there. So he probably sent that pilot, go pick up my friend Jackie. I'll give him a call, tell him to be out there and be ready, and picked him up and flew him. Probably took about 15 minutes to fly him to Homestead Air Force Base. The idea that Nixon and Gleason, without any Secret Service, driving around in the dark 40 miles from Jackie's house in a suburb of Miami, all the way down to Homestead, I don't believe for 1 minute happened. But I do believe the encounter happened together. I believe Nixon probably greeted Jackie on the chopper pad at Homestead, and the two of them got into a vehicle and were escorted, according to the story, by armed escorts at the military base and taken to this special kind of medical lab or morgue on a far end of the base. We know this mainly because he came home later that night just ashen and pale and all shook up. And Jackie's wife said, "Where have you been? What happened to you?" And he told her the story. He blurted it out. "Nixon showed me the proof of aliens at Homestead Air Force Base." And he proceeded to tell his wife. And a couple of years later, she let slip in an interview that was in a tabloid that this happened. And they had already kind of separated, Jackie and his wife at that time, like 75, I think. The event occurred about 2 years earlier. And Jackie got on the phone and chewed her out. "You're not supposed to talk about this. Don't tell people what I said." So she turned around in 1983 and said, "I'm going to tell the whole story," and wrote an article for the National Enquirer and told what Jackie told her. And Jackie reads the Enquirer because he loves the UFO stories. And he exploded again, got on the phone. "I told you to shut up." And I think she kind of probably wanted more money in a divorce settlement. And so I think she got it. She remained silent. She gave one interview in 2020, I think it was, and confirmed everything. She didn't back off the story whatsoever. Jackie told me this. Jackie died in 87. She felt free to talk at last. And she confirmed everything. She said, "I believed it. I think it's the truth." That Jackie was all shook up and he was just thundering with rage at the government after he got back from this little tour of Homestead. How could they keep telling us that aliens don't exist, belittling UFO people who cite them and report them when we've got the hard proof? He would get very upset, she said. And it was not just acting. He was really unable to eat, sleep. He kept smoking and drinking at least more than he normally did. And he was an insomniac and would stay up reading UFO books. And he could barely work at anything for years. He had a real gap between 73 and his next movie, which was like 77, I think it was, and close to Smokey and the Bandit when he made his big comeback. So you could tell he really was shook up.
So what happens next? So they land at Homestead, and they go over to this facility. By the way, Homestead was always a very interesting choice for me, because we've always heard about Edwards. We hear about Wright-Patterson, right? Area 51. Homestead just came out of nowhere, and I always found that very, very interesting and compelling at the same time. So what happened? So they Nixon picks them up at the helicopter. They go over to the facility, and what happens?
According to Jackie's wife, there were armed guards with them and an armed guard at the door to this medical facility. He stood aside. They went in, and it's a kind of examining room, either for healthy living patients who've suffered an injury, or like a morgue. There were 4 examining tables, and there were 4 aliens, identical, stretched out on these tables. Now, in the first hour of this show, we talked about the 1955 Sutton family in Kentucky having these little gremlin-type aliens with big pointy ears and big bug eyes. Jackie's description of what he saw at Homestead was almost the same exact race, the same exact alien. He said they were like 2.5 feet at most, big bug eyes, pointy ears, like little dwarf-type aliens. They don't match what Eisenhower met with, or maybe grays taken from the Roswell recovery or Cape Girardeau. They don't mesh with the blue Nords or the white tall aliens at all. So this is yet another race, apparently. And this is what I think Spielberg is going to lift and focus on in his maybe his last movie ever on aliens. It'll be most interesting to see what he does. But that's what Jackie reported to his wife. And he was just like allowed to inspect things. He didn't say whether he touched the dead aliens. He did not say whether they had any injuries, but he didn't report any, according to his wife. You know, were they mangled or not? Jackie did not say. He said he thought they looked like they were ready to be embalmed, or had been embalmed, like they were still intact, just lifeless. So there's another story about what they saw next. You can't believe everything you read online, but this story came about, of all places, MeTV wanted to promote The Honeymooners with Jackie Gleason, in which one episode, Jackie puts on this strange costume and says, "I am the man from space." He was so obsessed, even back in the 50s, about aliens. So MeTV ran this online article about the Nixon-Gleason encounter. And somebody replied, I understand that story is quite real, that Gleason was there, and that they went into this airbase that you can see from the highway as you drive past the base. Now, how would this guy know this? And he says, after they saw the bodies, Nixon took him into this airbase hangar where they saw a silver craft, a spaceship. It was up off the ground. It was kind of what you would say alive or activated. It was being held down by cables. And Jackie got himself a full view of this shiny silver craft, probably just blew him away. Nixon didn't seem to have any great emotional reaction. Like, yeah, this is something we've had for some time. You know, he was used to this. But Jackie was probably like all excited, like a kid on Christmas morning, because all his life, all he wanted to do was see the hard proof. And I think he got his $1 million worth that night from bodies and probably this craft. And he told his wife when he got home, he was probably slapped back into that helicopter, told, "Don't talk about this." And he promptly broke his vow when he got home because his wife wanted to know. He looked so haggard and ashen and was just rattled and smoking and drinking, his hands shaking. So he blurted out something they call in legal parlance an excited utterance, where there's been a crime committed and you can enter into court something that you blurted out at the time you might not normally say because you might keep hidden, but at the time you're so excited you blurt out the truth. And I think that's what Jackie did to his wife when he got home that night, close to midnight, she said.
Now, with all of the evidence that you have looked at and researched on this for your books, Do you think all of this happened just as it's been presented?
Pretty much, yeah. I know it's secondhand. A lot of UFO stories are secondhand or hearsay without a lot of hard proof. But there was a number of people that I tried to quote in the book that said, yes, this story actually happened. And after the book came out, my source said, yeah, he looked into it. He was skeptical. He said of this Nixon story. He said, well, it turns out you were right, Paul, that the story did happen, that Nixon was also there for this treaty, and he wanted to forge something on his own. And that I'm sure after Gleason left, Nixon was still there to deal with maybe live aliens, or at least this treaty that had to be resolved and reformulated after Eisenhower's encounter treaty maybe ran out on the exact 19th of February, on the 19th anniversary of the 54 encounter. So there's real reason for him to be there. And he was quite accustomed to the air base and flitting back and forth in a chopper. From all I've read, Nixon loved riding in Marine One. He loved that helicopter. So again, he appeared that day with Jackie after getting out of that very helicopter, and they were close buddies. So you can see where this really could have happened.
With each one of these crash retrievals that have been reported, and there's obviously many that haven't. And like this Homestead craft, where did it come from?
That's a good question. I don't know if Jackie found out or if he told his wife. He said there must have been a crash around here, but he didn't know. So it could have happened anywhere, frankly. It sounds like the sort of stuff they were looking at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the old Blue Lab, where they've alleged so many stories that said they've got bodies on ice. They're examining them in every possible way with the latest technology, and craft that have crashed like the Roswell affair. So if Nixon got on the phone and said, I want you to ship down to Homestead right away and get this set up for my friend to view, you didn't argue with Nixon. He was king of the hill back then. It's interesting to note that every American president before him had passed away. Just a few weeks before, Lyndon Johnson had died, and a month before, Harry Truman had died. J. Edgar Hoover was dead. Allen Dulles of the CIA was dead. All the big honchos from the old days were gone. Nixon's left standing alone, and nobody told him what to do. Not after that big landslide victory. They called him King Richard because, cynically, that he could do just about anything he wanted. And I think he did with Jackie.
How many presidents, if we go back, it sounds like Eisenhower wasn't read in. You know what I mean? And going through each administration, wins an election, 1 or 2 terms, and then moves on and moves on and moves on. But the establishment, right? The military is always in play, right? All of the security agencies are always in play. Their agenda continues through each administration as they come and go. So it makes you wonder what presidents are read in to this subject once they enter the Oval Office for the first time, or are they not read in at all?
You made a very good point earlier talking about Gerald Ford hosted these hearings in '66. This gets kind of overlooked, but of all people Nixon had to appoint to the vice presidency and possibly as his successor, it's Gerald Ford who held these hearings and was a big part of this, trying to figure out what these UFO sightings were for his constituents in Michigan. And that's where J. Allen Hynek finally got fed up and quit Project Blue Book when he was forced to tell people it was swamp gas. You were looking at this swamp gas was for metallic craft you saw in the middle of the day. It was nonsense. It was insulting to the intelligence. And Hynek went on his own way to investigate UFOs and believe that we are indeed being visited. And he worked with Steven Spielberg before he died. So all of these names kind of come together. But Ford, I think, knew some things. Carter wanted to know some things. He said, as soon as I become president, he campaigned on this, I'm going to make all information on UFOs public because I know they're real because I saw one. And as soon as he got to be president, he clammed up pretty quick. He's like, well, I don't know. I asked NASA and they won't get back to me. I think they thought he was a threat to blab with disclosure. And in those days, you did not have disclosure, really. Like you pointed out, I think Nixon, through Emenegger, Robert Emenegger, the filmmaker, was banding about having disclosure in his second term. That would make him quite an historic president. But that all fell through when Watergate had one revelation of government secrets after another, almost every day, drip, drip, drip. And they decided we better not do this. We better keep the lid on the UFO story. And I think
there are reports. Now you can read the books, and I have. The White House, through the Department of Defense, had planned a nationwide disclosure tour where they were going to have dioramas of flying saucers and ET and film and talk about aliens in contact across the United States. And this was, I think, they had Disney involved. This is like a big production, and Watergate happened. Yeah. It stopped everything.
That. They still should have done that. And I understand they were possibly going to do that during the Carter administration, but that got scotched. Reagan came in, and he was someone who had actually seen a UFO while he was governor of California. And this is the book I'm working on now, is Reagan's Close Encounters. And he was very seriously interested. I was surprised to read while researching Reagan. As a little boy, he read the John Carter series about a U.S. Confederate soldier, well, I guess a Union soldier during the Civil War, who meets these landed aliens, and they take him to Mars and has all these adventures. And Reagan ate up these books, a series of books. So he had, even from childhood, a great interest in extraterrestrials. And he finally saw one in 1974 while flying on an airplane as governor of California. So he pressed, I think, for information and supposedly got a briefing within a month or so at Camp David on what we are encountering, what we're experiencing. And again, he couldn't go forward with this information. It satisfied his curiosity, but in his 8 years, all he did was talk about, what if we were to meet up with an alien force? Wouldn't that unite all the nations of the world? And he kind of hedged it and hinted at and talked about this rather obliquely, but then in the end, he said nothing.
Here's the trippy thing. Reagan is with Nancy in his Mustang convertible. He's driving down PCH. And they're on their way to Lucille Ball's house. She's having a birthday party for an actor, Cliff Robertson. I believe it was Cliff Robertson. So anyway, they look out and they see something come out of the ocean. It's lit up. They look at it and it flies away. So they go to Lucille Ball's house for this party. Again, I think it was Cliff Robertson.
William Holden?
William Holden, Glenn Ford, one of them cats, right?
Yeah.
Oh, it might have been William Holden. Could have been.
He was a good friend of Reagan's, yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. So anyway, pick one of those names, and you're going to be pretty close.
Just fill in the blank.
Yeah. So they show up. The press is there. It's a big. It's Lucille Ball, Desi Arnaz, big party, and Ronald and Nancy start telling everybody about the UFO that they saw on PCH. And instead of the press picking up on the Hollywood glitzy birthday party, it's the UFO story that makes it out. And this was like a really, really big deal back in Hollywood at that time. And I often wonder if that set things off for Reagan for the future and his attitude about ET and UFOs, because he wouldn't let it up. And if we actually look at, I can't say as much about Kennedy, but everything else after that through the 60s, Gerald Ford, of course, Nixon, then Gerald Ford, Reagan, Obama, Clinton, everybody had their same UFO situation. They talked about it and said that they couldn't talk about it. Every one of them it was like a method of operation. There's nothing. You would think that the president of the United States, being allegedly, air quotes, the most powerful person on the planet, has access to this information. And if you believe what they had to say, they didn't. None of them. It was crazy. Every single one had the same story.
I guess the existing excuse is we don't want to touch off a panic. Oh, people will be so scared, so we've just got to downplay it or pretend like it's not happening. Obama, Bush, and Clinton have all been on like Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, and they will ask him, Stephen Colbert, are we being visited? What'd you find out? And they give like, oh, I can tell you, but then I'd have to kill you, or that's secret, or they give a glib answer. And their non-answer tells you the truth that, can't talk about it. If it was nothing, they'd say, oh, it's a bunch of junk. That's something they asked Jackie Gleason about over and over. Your wife is telling this story that you told about Nixon, and he refused to deny it. He said, I'm not going to talk about that. I don't have any comment. He could have easily blown the story away and said, it's absolutely not true. And he didn't do that. And after my book came out, there was an article on Jackie, and it said that Jackie told a few Hollywood showbiz pals, Nixon showed me the proof. That's all I want to tell you. But he did show me the proof my wife was telling the truth. So that's confirmation that Nixon knew. Reagan probably knew. Assorted presidents since then may know, but they can't tell you. And it's depressing to find out that they're sort of lying by omission. They're not going to tell you what they found out. They take an oath. They don't want to be threatened, maybe by, even ex-presidents in retirement having a thug show up and, you've talked too much. Now we're going to have to deal with you, or a member of your family. Your daughter, is very vulnerable, sir. Whatever president you are, we'd hate to have something happen to her for your talking, So they keep the lid on it, and they talk about these days holding hearings, getting to the bottom of this with Congresswoman Lena, I think her name is, and I hope for the best. But so far,
Luna, you mean Luna?
I'm sorry, yeah, not Lena, Luna. And so I hope they dig out everything. I know that the current Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, held hearings just a few years ago, and he said, we're getting all kinds of people coming forward to tell us what they know, and they still won't talk about it. It's classified. We can't open the files. You can't hear this, and one excuse after another. So I don't know if disclosure is going to come anytime soon, but I'd like to think it will, and that maybe Spielberg's going to be a part of it. They've recruited him.
Why keep it a secret now?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because if we look back historically, all right, and you can look at War of the Worlds and the hysteria that happened there and stuff. I get that. That was 1938. It's a different world now, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the excuses, plural, that have been used for not disclosing in the past from every group that analyzed this, whether it was the Rand Corporation or whoever, that religions would collapse, the economy would collapse, anarchy, right? That people couldn't handle it. Okay, all right. I can understand, but that's not where we are today. So why keep it a secret now? So much has been leaked out and so much has been discussed in the media. nobody's jumped off any buildings.
Yeah. In FDR's day, Truman and Eisenhower, aliens were still kind of a fringe thing. You didn't have them mainstream, but now we've had decades and decades of TV shows, My Favorite Martian, Mark from Ork, Spielberg movies, all kinds of an explosion of science fiction showing space travel and aliens. We're conditioned mentally now. We accept it. You talk to most people and they've got a story, a sighting, or they believe, yeah, we're being visited. You can't tell me we're the only ones in the universe. It's just silly to think that we're alone. So the mindset of the country has changed, and they've got to be open to this. The only thing I can tell you is maybe the government knows that a small number of visiting aliens here are not very friendly or trustworthy. They're a little frightening. And so whenever you see a disc, a spaceship, a triangle or something, people might automatically panic and think that's them, when it's just a small fraction of those visitors who are cruel or cold-hearted, and the others may be much more friendly or at least scientifically oriented and not going to harm you. But that everyone, the populace, will lump them all together and think we're in trouble, we're going to be invaded. That's the only thing I can come up with why they would continue to keep the lid on this story.
If something nuts happens, something fun, something nuts, some giant spacecraft over Los Angeles, right, and just parks, and if something like that goes down, the governments of the world have splaining to do.
Yeah.
What did you know? And what were you? That's a bad position for the governments to be in, and so maybe that's why things are happening right now, like they are. I don't know, but they need to really come to terms with being very honest with the world, because if something goes down, that's a problem. That's a real problem. There's your anarchy in the streets. There's going to be some really pissed off people. And on the religious side too, as well. What did you know? And why were you keeping this from us? That's got to be avoided at this. So maybe that's part of it. What do you think?
That sounds reasonable. It's been over 80 years. And they've kept the lid on, and then they're going to have to disclose some things, and other things may snowball. And we're all going to say, you kept us in the dark deliberately for 80 years, and you don't really have much of an excuse. I remember when John Lennon was being shadowed by the FBI. They wanted to kick him out of the country. And this reporter, it was a college professor, sued to get these documents on why they're withholding information from the public on why the government harassed John Lennon. And when he got the documents, they were finally released. After all this legal hassle, it was a big bunch of junk, a bunch of nothing. And he couldn't believe that the government didn't want to give this up. Their knee-jerk reaction is just cover up and deny and everything. And it makes you think that the UFO story is the same way. There are more movies coming out, and I have a little surprise for you. There's a new movie coming out on the life of Art Bell. Have you heard that one?
Yes, I have.
That will star Paul Giamatti, who's a big UFO fan, has his own podcast, and he has been obsessed with Art Bell. In the course of the story, I've been told by the producers, they're going to tell the Nixon-Gleason encounter story and interview Paul Blake Smith during the movie, and he will, an actor portraying me, explain just what I've told you tonight, the whole Nixon-Gleason encounter in my book, and they'll have that in the storyline of the movie that you're going to see. Unless things change, there'll be a movie version of me coming out in the next year, and I'll be in this Art Bell saga with Paul Giamatti. So that's going to be exciting, and that'll be something to look for. And we'll see I hope they get someone young and handsome, not some crazy old loon like Christopher Lloyd and, Back to the Future with wild hair playing me and ranting and raving or something like that. It should be a fun movie. It's all about the paranormal and UFOs and ghost stories. And they're going to use that Nixon-Gleason story, platform it in the movie, and you'll see it fleshed out and something very entertaining and fun.
Giamatti, good. I mean, he's a great actor. I love everything that he's been in. He's just great. I could see him playing Art Bell. He's a little too short to play Art Bell, but I think it's going to be interesting. I mean, I knew Art pretty well. You know, I worked for him for a while, and you know, I hosted Coast to Coast for a long time, for 7 years. And I have a great respect for the legacy of that program and for what Art brought to this community. So it's going to be interesting. I'm glad it's being made. And I'm glad it's Giamatti spearheading it. I hope that it happens.
He's a huge Art Bell fan. Now, I'm hoping they will take AI technology and get that deep, resonating voice of Art Bell and place it somehow in Giamatti's dialogue and, you know, make it sound like it's really Art Bell in the movie. I don't know if they're going to do that, but then you get into, like, not copyright infringement, but having to deal with his estate and getting the rights to his voice and having him say certain things. But they're not going to be making up crazy stuff about Art Bell. As you know, you knew him personally. He had his personal problems, his ups and downs. It was like a soap opera, and it'll make for a great movie. Just depicting real life, what he went through, and like crazy people threatening him and having to move to the Philippines and coming back, and just everything that happened to him. And so let's hope this does get made, and that I'm in it, the actor portraying me. It'll be of great interest for me from a personal standpoint, but I hope it's a big blockbuster, just like Spielberg's. I hope everyone goes to see it.
Now, where can everybody get your books?
They're on Amazon.com. My books were published, these two by foundations, but they just refer you to Amazon. And they're in audio book form, well read, by Tantor.com. And that's selling pretty well, and I'm very pleased by that. So we're hoping also the Eisenhower encounter can become a motion picture through the same people who are producing the Nixon story, but that's still up in the air. We're focusing on Nixon-Gleason right now within the Art Bell saga. So that's all something that should help maybe put the pressure on the government. Like, we know these things have happened. You might as well pop the lid off. You know, no more fooling around.
Thank you so much, Paul. And I look forward to everything that is happening. And I look forward to our next conversation that we have here on Fade to Black. Thank you so much, and enjoy your weekend.
All right. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Perfect night, perfect conversation. Paul Blake Smith. Now, his links are below for all of his books. And for me, it's my Friday. Yeah, I've got a busy weekend coming up. I will see everybody right here on Monday. Until then, all I've got is go back, Lee. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Special thanks to Bill, John, Dex, Jessica, Dennis, and Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music by Doug Aldrich. Intro, Space Boy. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2024 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Go back, Lee Tappy.